Hello, Bronwyn Tyrrell, financial stylist here at Vivid Advisors in Wodonga. As you know, we're answering the questions that are important to you. We've had lots of awesome questions submitted and we have covered one on good and bad debt and what they actually are and if there's such a thing. So a follow-up question to that we've had is in regards to debt and tips to reduce debt essentially. So debt is an extremely common thing and it can be very debilitating if you let it control you, and it is very emotionally draining and it can be very unhealthy to have debt that is out of control. So most of us have some form of debt unfortunately, but I do have some tips in regards to reducing that debt. So I've got 7 tips for you today that I hope you get some benefit out of. The first tip I have is to consolidate your debts. So if you have a few different debts hanging around, perhaps some credit cards, personal loan, car loan, if you have the ability to do so, it's really advantageous if you can consolidate those debts into one loan. That one loan should have a lower interest rate than what your other debts combined do. So if you've got credit card debts, the interest rates on those are often ridiculous, up to around 17%, sometimes even more. If you can consolidate that debt into an account that's got a lower interest rate, you're going to be able to pay that loan off quicker. So the trick is to pay the same amount that you're currently paying in those other loans off your new loan. So if you've consolidated 4 loans, for example, into one with a lower interest rate, pay the same amount off that you're currently paying. Because you've now got it on a lower interest rate, you're going to be able to pay it off quicker and you're not paying as much interest over the duration of the loan. So therefore, the whole loan amount will be eliminated quicker. Tip number 2 is to pay off your non-deductible debt first. So in my previous video I spoke about good and bad debt. So this is referring to paying off that bad debt first. Any debt that is paying those higher interest rates or it's not giving you any benefits whatsoever, like perhaps a tax deduction, pay off those debts first, because the sooner you can get rid of those, the better off you'll be in the longer term. So examples of the non-deductible debts are things like your credit cards and the personal loans and car loans. Loans that are against something that doesn't have any sort of benefit on the other side. So get rid of those debts first and then move on to your deductible debt or your good debt. My third tip is to pay off your debts with the highest interest rate first. Now this would be assuming that for whatever reason you haven't been able to consolidate your debts as per one of my previous tips. So if you have debts that you can't consolidate, work out what the interest rates are on each of those loans and concentrate on paying the most available amount off the one with the highest interest rate. It's important to make sure that you're paying at least the minimum amounts off the others, but allocate more to the debt that has the highest interest rate so that you can eliminate that first. You're going to save money by doing so. Then you can allocate that amount onto the next level. You're always paying the minimums off those others, but you're knocking off those cards with the highest interest rate first. You're also going to feel like you're achieving something as well. Once you pay off one, cut it up and move on, it's a really good feeling to be able to do so. So pay off those loans with the highest interest rates first. Tip number 4 is to make fortnightly repayments on your loans. So generally when you take out a loan, they'll quote you the repayments on a monthly basis. So therefore you pay 12 monthly payments over the year. If you were to actually divide that monthly payment by 2 and make that payment on a fortnightly basis, over 26 fortnights in the year, you will actually pay off more than if you were going to pay the 12 monthly repayments. That's a really good habit to get into, and it's a simple way that you can pay off a little bit more debt, therefore reduce your interest over the long term and get it paid off quicker. Tip number 5 is to stick to the same repayments if interest rates drop. So we're very lucky at the moment. We're in a very low interest rate environment. When you are paying an amount off a loan, hopefully you're paying more than what the minimum amount is. If interest rates were to drop, it's very tempting to also drop the amount that you're paying off that loan and use that extra money towards other things. If you keep the repayments the same, however, you're effectively paying more off your loan because the interest rates have dropped. So don't get tempted when interest rates drop to reduce your payments. Pay more than the minimum, pay what you can afford and keep it at that amount regardless of what the interest rates drop to. Tip number 6 is don't borrow against depreciating assets. So depreciating assets are things like your car. If you borrow to buy a car, that car is just continually dropping in value. So the loan that you have and the interest that you're paying is borrowed against an asset that's actually dropping in value. It's not good debt, it's bad debt to have. So if at all possible, save up the money to buy a car or any other asset that's going to depreciate in value so that you're not paying a loan and paying back the bank for an asset that is just going to drop in value. So my final tip number 7, is stop getting into further debt. To do this, have emergency funds available. Have a savings account that is there specifically for emergencies so that if something comes up that's not in your budget, you can use those funds to cover it and you're not grabbing your credit card or going and getting a personal loan to cover for those emergencies. So having an emergency fund available will stop you getting further into debt. Also, do your budget. Make sure your budget is done right, because if you budget for what your expenses are and you have an emergency fund available, you shouldn't need to be using that credit card and going further into debt. You don't want to be getting further into debt whilst you're also paying off debt, because it's just a very vicious cycle to get into. So they're my 7 tips for reducing debt. So hopefully something out of that has been of value to you. If so, please share this video with anyone else who you think may be interested, and make sure you like us on Facebook and elect to follow us as well so that you get the notifications of when we post new videos. Got more coming up with other great questions that we've had that we're going to answer as well. So look forward to seeing you soon.